On the early morning of February 28, 1994, 6 J-21 Jastreb attack jets were flying low over the mountains of Bosnia. They belonged to the Bosnian Serb Air Force. This was not a training flight. It was not a patrol. They were entering the NATO-enforced no-fly zone over Bosnia to bomb a weapons factory. Under the rules of that no-fly zone, fixed-wing combat aircraft were not supposed to be flying attack missions there. But these 6 pilots came anyway. The flight was led by Franko Vukmirovic. The men behind him had volunteered for the mission. Their aircraft, the J-21 Jastreb, was an old Yugoslav attack jet. It could fly low, it could carry bombs, it could attack ground targets. But against NATO F-16s, it had almost nothing going for it. It was slower, less maneuverable, poorly equipped, and badly outmatched. So the Jastrebs stayed low. They used the terrain as cover, trying to keep their radar profile buried behind the mountains. Low altitude could help them get close, but it could not help them bomb the target. As the weapons factory came closer, the J-21s had to climb. They pulled up to around 2,000 meters and began setting up for the attack run. That was when they came out of the terrain shadow. NATO radar saw them. 50 miles away, 2 patrolling F-16s received the call. Black flight, you have 6 bogies. BRAAA 320 for 52, at 7,000 flanking. That was not just noise on the radio. It told the F-16s where the targets were, how far away they were, how high they were, and how they were moving. The 2 F-16 turned toward the contact. For the J-21 pilots, the hunters were already on the way. But Vukmirovic did not abort the mission. There was a reason. On previous missions, NATO fighters had often watched, warned, and driven aircraft away. They came close, they showed force, but they did not always shoot. Vukmirovic knew that if the F-16s really wanted to kill them, they could do it from miles away. So when he saw the 2 American fighters coming fast, he was nervous, but he kept going. The F-16s roared in from the front and blasted through near the J-21 formation. For the old attack jets, the message was clear: you have been seen. But the Jastrebs did not break away. The weapons factory was already ahead, and these aircraft did not have modern precision systems. They still used optical sights. The pilots had to put the target into the crosshairs, hold the right angle, and release at the right moment. One pair after another rolled into the attack. 550-pound bombs dropped from the pylons. They fell from different directions and exploded around the target. That changed everything. The radio call came in. They dropped bombs. Understood. You are clear to engage. Weapons free. From that second on, the F-16s were no longer just watching. They were hunting. The J-21s had finished their attack and were turning back toward base, but they could not outrun F-16. One of the American pilots moved in behind the last aircraft in the formation. He switched to air-to-air mode. On the display, he selected an AIM-120 AMRAAM. A target box appeared on the head-up display. Lock, Fox 3. The missile came off the rail. The AIM-12 was a radar-guided missile. It did not need a close-range dogfight. It did not need the F-16 pilot to chase the target with guns. It went after the J-21's radar return. At the very rear of the formation, Zlatan Črnilić was scanning the sky for the Americans. Then he saw a huge flash. For a moment, he thought he had been hit. Then he saw the explosion tear into his wingman. The left wing was shredded. Half of it was gone. The first J-21 broke apart. The rest of the formation immediately dove for the ground. The formation split. Each pair went a different way, diving into the Bosnian valleys. This was no longer an interception. It was a chase. One of the F-16s followed them down between the hills. Črnilić was now alone. He kept looking over his shoulder and saw an American fighter behind him. That was a terrible place to be. His J-21 had no modern radar advantage, no advanced air-to-air missile, and not enough speed to run away. So he went lower, as low as he dared. He skimmed over the terrain, even crossing near electrical transmission wires, trying to make the valley, the wires, and the ground clutter work in his favor. But the F-16 was already in position. Fox 2, an AIM-9 Sidewinder, left the rail. This was a heat-seeking missile. It was not chasing a radar return. It was chasing the heat from Črnilic's engine. The missile closed in and exploded near the wires and the tail of the J-21. Fragments cut away part of the vertical stabilizer. But the aircraft did not fall. Kornilik was still flying. He tried to report what had happened. His radio was dead. Now he was alone in a damaged jet, low in the valleys with no working communications and no idea if another F-16 was still behind him. Elsewhere, Vukmirovic and his wingman were pushing their Jastrebs as hard as they could. They raced through the valleys trying to stay low and use the terrain. But an F-16 was closing the distance. Another AMRAAM launched. Vukmirovic was still searching the sky for the enemy fighter when the missile found his wingman. The J-21 disappeared into fire and scrap. Vukmirovic broke hard, but the F-16 stayed with him. Another missile came in and struck near his engine. The explosion tore open the fuselage. Flames poured out of the holes. Vukmirovic fought the dying aircraft, pulling hard on the stick, trying to climb. But fire was already around the cockpit. He knew the aircraft was gone. He pulled the emergency canopy handle and ejected. The F-16 roared past as Vukmirovic came down under his parachute. The fight kept moving. The F-16 pressed toward the next targets, but now they had a problem of their own: fuel. The call came over the radio. Approaching bingo fuel. That meant the fighters were running close to the fuel state, where they had to turn back if they wanted to get home safely. There were still J-21s trying to escape. One F-16 pilot judged he might have time for one more shot. He got a lock. Fox 2. The missile launched. The J-21 pilot saw it come off the rail and turned hard, trying to outmaneuver it. The missile exploded near his wing. This time, the fragments did not do enough damage, and the F-16 could not keep chasing. It had to break off. For the J-21 pilot, it was a brief breath of life, but it did not last. NATO sent in 2 more F-16. Fresh hunters entered the fight. The surviving J-21s dropped even lower, racing almost at treetop height through the valleys. They were trying to find speed, trying to find cover, trying to make the hills save them. But the F-16 stayed behind them. Vukmirovic and Goran Zaric had already heard their friends being shot down one by one. Now they saw another F-16 appearing over the hills behind them. There was almost no room left. Vukmirovic made a desperate choice. He turned straight toward a cliff at maximum speed. Zaric followed close behind. The 2 J-21s were now racing toward the ground. They had to wait until the last possible second and pull up. If the F-16 refused to follow that close, the terrain might break the chase. But there was no margin. The ground rushed into the windscreen. The G-forces crushed the pilots down. Vukmirovic's jet clipped the ground. It exploded into flame. Zaric looked back. No parachute. The F-16S came through the smoke and kept coming. Zaric dove again, trying to use the valley as cover, but they were too close. Fox 2. The missile caught him in the tail. His J-21 burst into flames and lost control. Zaric released the canopy and ejected, but he was too low. The parachute had no time to open. He fell into the fireball of his own crashed jet. The F-16S left that fight and caught another damaged J-21 trying to limp home. The pilot, Tenalji, was watching his gauges, trying to keep the aircraft alive. Then an F-16 roared past. Tenalji pulled on the stick. His plan was not to fight. It was to gain enough altitude to eject before the American finished him off. The F-16 moved in behind him. Tenalji grabbed the emergency handle. But the missile never came. Instead, the F-16 pulled alongside and matched his speed. The 2 pilots saw each other through their canopies. The American pilot saluted him, then flew away. The fight was over. 6 J-21 pilots had volunteered for the mission. 3 never came home. The battle became known as the Banja Luka incident. It was also NATO's first combat engagement in its history. Robert Wright Wilbur was credited with 3 victories, the highest score by a U.S. Air Force pilot in a single mission since the Korean War. Stephen Yogi Allen was credited with 1. But the real story was not just the number of aircraft shot down. It was the moment the no-fly zone changed. The J-21 pilots did not only misjudge the F-16 speed, they did not only misjudge the AIM-120 or the AIM-9. Their biggest mistake was assuming the old pattern still applied. Before that morning, NATO aircraft might watch, warn, and drive them away. But on February 28, 1994, the no-fly zone stopped being just a warning line. It became a kill zone. When weapons free came over the radio, old aircraft, old sights, low-level escape, and past experience were no longer enough. The F-16 was no longer the policeman watching from the side. It was the hunter,